I wanted to start this story about the return of the manager with a tea I had a little while ago with a guy called Ian Davis, who runs, or used, at that stage ran McKinsey worldwide. And he's obviously an incredibly bright man. He's worked with a wide range of businesses. He's also tremendously humble. And I said to Ian, so honoured, delighted to have tea with you. Wonder if you could kind of share some of your wisdom and genius. And he was like, oh, I know nothing. I'm a simple guy, da-da-da. A wonderfully understated way. He said, but one thing I will tell you is I've lived through 3 recessions. I've worked through 3 recessions. And I think I've seen a pattern about what differentiates those companies that come out of the recession faster than the rest. What is it, the delta that shifts people up? And he said in 1980, where there was a horrendous recession, the answer was strategy. Those organizations that did the analysis, that worked out where was the right place to allocate resources in terms of country or product line or supply chain or whatever, they came out of the recession faster than their competitors. He said in 1991, to me, and this is him speaking, it was clearly technology. Those who use IT to understand their customers better, to increase quality, to reduce costs, to improve efficiency, those were the people who got out of the recession fastest. He said, in my opinion, those 2 are now just things you have to operate. No one goes and says, oh, why don't we sell stuff online? That'll give us competitive advantage for a while, because we know we just have to do that in order to play in the game. Some people from ASOS here, the whole business is based on selling online. So that's not going to keep us an advantage now. So he said, in my opinion, if I look at the recession of 2009, those organizations that are coming out of it fastest are those that focus on talent. Those who've worked out how to attract, retain, and help flourish the best people in their business. And as Seb says, with the increasing turnover of people staying for 12, 14 months, that becomes a really expensive part of how organizations operate. So if talent is the big issue for business, that how we're going to get competitive advantage, and I apply this equally to the government and to the charity sector and to other organizations that are looking for greater efficiency and greater productivities in different ways, then what role does the manager have in all of this? Well, there's an element about why do people stay in organizations. Now, I would love to say we're obsessed by research at Mind You. For those of you who don't know us, one of our other beliefs is science is sexy. In research, we trust. So we're constantly for data and measures and evaluations of what does deliver an impact and what doesn't. Now, I would be lying to you if I said the number 1 reason why people stay in organizations is their manager. It's number 3. So why do I stay? I have someone I can respect, I can learn from, I can grow with, I like. That helps me stay. But there are other things that are more important. The second thing is what makes people perform? What makes me actually do a bit more? And here, the research, and Seb will share more of this in the Performance Management Cafe, is about setting goals that stretch and giving fortnightly or at least frequent feedback on performance against those goals. And that gives an enormous delta on performance. And that feedback and those goals usually come from the manager. I accept not always, there are some exceptions, but by and large, that's where they come from. So the second most important thing of why people perform, and indeed why they change, is their manager. The most important is themselves, their own pathology and views on the life and so forth. And again, we'll talk about that separately. But when it comes to why do people leave, there's an undisputed number 1 here, and that is the manager. That's why people go. It's not always why they go, because there's a lovely example I heard the other day of a guy who's working in an IT company, clearly not one here, who finally his manager drove him completely nuts. He said, I've had enough of this, I'm off, I can't face it anymore. I love the company, I love the industry, I love my job, but I can't face the company anymore. So he went up to a recruiter, and he said, look, I'm looking for a new job. And the recruiter said, that's fabulous, because there's a real shortage of people with your skills in this area. There'd be no problem finding you a job at all. So he went home, a bit lighter, relieved, went to sleep, woke up the next morning, thought a bit, and he went back to the recruiter. And he said, did you say there's a real shortage of people in this area? There's lots of jobs available. And the recruiter said, yeah, absolutely, there are loads of them. He said, I know the perfect person for you. And he described his manager perfectly. And sure enough, 3 weeks later, the manager gets a call, and 6 months later, the manager's working somewhere else. So that was a nice, innovative way of solving that problem. So we don't always leave because of our manager. Sometimes we get our manager to leave because of them. But by and large, it's because of the manager that people choose to go. So this is what's going on. What happened 20 years ago with managers? Well, for those of you, most of you look way too young to have been working at that stage, but sadly I was. And I remember back in the early 90s, there was this massive thing called delayering, taking out layers of managers. Bob Horton, who was CEO of BP, announced that he was going to go from 21 levels of manager to 7, removing swathes of managers. I worked with Royal Bank of Scotland at the time a lot as an advisor on their Columbus program, which was the beginning of their great growth period, their 18 years of great growth. Obviously, a slight problem with a dodgy deal and government taking them over more recently, but they had a good period before that. And that's based on removing a lot of the decisions from managers, a lot of the layers of managers in the organizations. So are we saying now managers are really important, hang on, we got rid of them, why are we bringing them all back? And the answer is we need managers, but they're a different kind of manager. And so the manager, the old manager, if you like, best typified by a book by Anthony Sampson called A Company Man, The Rise and Fall of Corporate Life. This manager managed workflow, managed tasks, managed quality, and controlled the people that worked for them. And it was a different kind of manager. It was quite a rational, quite a structured way of looking at management. And the key qualification that got you to accelerate here was an MBA. MBAs were gold dust. This was a really good thing to get and increase the value in the marketplace and make you more employable. We're not talking about that kind of manager. The manager we're talking about now is a manager who knows how to set boundaries, how to motivate, how to engage, how to guide, how to enthuse, how to control, how to direct, how to, in effect, manage human beings, manage people, so that they can flourish and do the best for the organization and indeed for themselves. So where once the MBA was what you wanted, now what you need is the psychology degree. Where once it was Anthony Sampson's view on Company Man, now it's Cialdini's book on influence. So what we're looking for is a very different kind of manager. We originally called this the manager is back, but not as you know her, because we thought the idea that a lot of the traits are ones that are more familiar or traditionally associated with female traits. Now, a lot of people said this looked like it was a diversity program, and they got a bit confused by that, so we changed the title. But it's the spirit of a new set of things. So I would hate us to think it's the same managers coming back. It's a very different kind of manager responsibility. Now, I mentioned a moment ago I care about data and we care about results. And therefore, I will share just a couple of examples. There are many more in the white paper and many more that we can provide for you separately on the business impact of these managers. This is a study that looked at basically, did you think your manager was good at managing performance or not? And those that thought their manager was good at managing performance, and there were some independent metrics to assess that as well, found that the managers who were good at managing performance got 25% greater productivity out of their people than the ones that weren't. And that's a big old gain. A lot of systems and IT is introduced with a lot less promise than that. And most of that gain, 16%, came because the person got better at the job, they were more effective. But 9% came just because they cared. They felt their manager was spending time with them. Now, Google, which is another great company for metrics and data and facts, they researched across all their manager population and segmented it by those that were most and least effective. And they worked out what were the characteristics or the behaviors of those managers that got the best results. And there's a full list of all the list in the white paper, but really came down to spending time with the one-to-one time with the people whom they managed. And that led to a direct correlation in business results. So again, some of these findings are deliciously crystal clear and quite simple, but also incredibly compelling. Another study I'll share with you, and again, there's all this debate about comparing like with like. This study from a guy called Koene, K-O-E-N-E, and he did a study of Dutch supermarkets. And the idea was all these supermarkets across Holland were they're all the same chain, and they were broadly similar. Some are slightly more regional, some are slightly more, but there was no reason why they should perform particularly differently. And he wanted to correlate the different styles of management. He called it leadership, and to be fair, there's an element of leadership because the store manager had their managers, grocery and bakery and fresh foods and then also frontline. The style of leadership with the performance of those stores. And he looked at 3 different kinds of management, and one was transformational, which was the vision, the charisma, but vision and the direction, but also the attention to detail and the momentum, building a very clear path and sticking with that. Then there was the considerate, the person who cared, listened, coached, was supportive, attentive. And then there was the structured, if you like, the old manager style, the company man one. And these were the results on the softer measures, the subjective factors about how good those stores were seen to be. And what we can see here is that those with the structured management underperformed those with the inspirational and the considerate on 3 metrics: general communication, efficiency, and readiness to innovate. Now, if we stop there, we might think, oh, well, that's pretty good. That shows that the considerate and the transformation are about the same. And the structure, the old stuff, which we knew was a bit rubbish, well, that confirms that. But what he then went on to do was to measure against the business metrics of net profit and controllable costs. And here we find that the considerate and the structured are doing roughly the same. and it's the transformational that seems to be making a delta and a difference there. So again, there's lots of research about different types of management having very direct and different types of impact. Mitchells and Butlers, the pub chain that owns All Bar One, and Brown's, you may have, or O'Neill's, may have even been to one of the two of those lovely places, they found there's a direct correlation between employee engagement and the quality of food served. And the quality of food served links to customer loyalty and repeat visits and profitability and so on and so forth. And that engagement is linked to the behavior of the manager. So again, a really nice chain of links between behaviors of managers and business impact. So this is where we're at, this is the case, this is the story. What's going wrong? Why aren't we all embracing this and having fantastic managers and getting all the results? It doesn't cost us very much, and the benefits seem to be enormous. And hey, we're not stupid, so why aren't we on the case? We've looked at 6 things that we see that tend to go wrong in the organizations that we work with. And you may recognize some of these, or you may say none of them apply to you, and this would be a good debate and discussion to have later. The first is that for all the good chat, when it comes to promotions, when it comes to pay rises, when it comes to bonuses, an exceptional individual contributor who is poor at people management tends to do better than an average individual contributor who is very good at people management. And that when we go, and I mean, I've been working with a big bank, global bank at the moment. Banks are particularly not flavour of the month, and they're particularly harsh in this area. But they had all the chief operating officers from across the world in the room for one day to talk about performance management and how it should be done globally across this bank. And they started off with a view that kind of bonuses were the answer. And again, there's lots of research that delightfully shows that's not the case, which we can share and discuss another time. But the issue was that in order to succeed here, though you had a people promise and a franchise promise, the reality was if you didn't deliver on those, that was just an excuse to knock down your bonus. But doing well in that was never enough to get you up. So do the great people, other great heroes in our organizations, those who are great at people management, they tend not to be. And part of that is because it's on top of everything else. We're not expected to release any of our individual contributor roles when we become manager. We're expected to do it as well. So that's the second issue. The third thing is we look at it and we see the impossible. We've been to organizations where there are over 100 competencies that a manager is supposed to deliver on. And you look at 100 competencies, you've got no chance of working out what it is to do. And different levels of each one, different behaviors. And it's taken a fantastic HR consultancy months to develop these, and I'm sure they're absolutely delicious and make a great deal of sense. But as a communication tool, they're next to useless. And therefore I look at that, I go, I can't possibly do that. I don't know what it is, and off I go. No, don't bother with that. The next thing is that management development, we have found, is often too little and too late. And what we mean by this is often there's a really good manager course, but it happens a year after I become a manager, or maybe even longer than that. Or I have to be a really good manager in order to go on this course. And even when I go on it, then a lot of the issues aren't quite raising me. They aren't pitching up at the level. So I'm learning how to run a team meeting. I've done quite a few of those already. Maybe learning how to give feedback. Well, you know, I've been in this job for 18 months now. I kind of got the hang of that. The problems I've got is I've got someone who's trying to undermine me in the team. How do I handle that? I've got 2 people who aren't getting on, and they're both critical to the team. What do I do to resolve that? I've got someone who I haven't not getting on with. How do I resolve that? I've got people who are complaining about people or trying to pinch my people. Those are the problems that I have as a manager. Let's get into those much tougher, often political, often relational, often psychological issues, rather than just the basics. And so people come back to us with that. The fifth one is that good equals popular. And I think the growth of 360 feedback and upward feedback is really powerful because it gets a challenge on those managers who perhaps, as one of the clients we work with, called people eaters. They just destroy the people. It's a good way of checking on that. But now it's, in some places, become a substitute for deciding whether someone is a good manager or not. And therefore, they think the key is to be popular. Have you ever seen that episode from Friends when Chandler gets promoted? And he tries to become popular with all the people he used to work with, and it's a complete disaster, and they just have no respect for him, and he isn't popular, and they're busy trying to be nice to his face and being unkind about him at the water cooler. So getting managers to move away from good equals popular, but whilst recognizing that what impact you have does matter. And the final one is who manages the managers. And what we've found is that there's a lot of organizations who focus a lot on first-line managers and a lot on the senior leaders, but the group in the middle are kind of left to their own devices. But these second and third line managers then manage their direct reports as if they're individual contributors. So they say, how are you doing against the goals? Why are you a bit down on this one? What do you need to do to sort that out? Rather than how are your people performing? Who's underperforming? Why is that? What are you going to address? Who's the person you're least likely to speak to in your team? What are you going to do about that? How are you going to build those connections? So the role of the second and third line managers needs to change significantly if we're going to make the first line manager really good at people management. We've done an enormous analysis of management research across a whole range of studies and done a meta-analysis. And we've identified 7 core capabilities or traits or competencies or whatever word you want to use for them to explain what seems to make most difference to a manager. And some people say, which one matters most? And the answer is very easy. It's the first one. So this matters more than all the rest. And it's the ability to form strong relationships, know how to repair them, nourish them, and change them, adapt them, and so forth. There's a thing called the LMX. It sounds a bit like a bicycle, I know, but it's about the leader-member exchange. It's a psychological term that defines the strength of the relationship between the boss and the person being managed. And what they've found very clearly is that where there's a strong LMX, this has a disproportionate impact, like a magnifier, on everything else that the manager does. So for example, when a manager tries to influence by saying, you're fantastic at this, I'd love you to go and do it, it really plays to your strengths, or we need to do this because that's what the rules are around here, that's what the bosses have said. If they've got a strong LMX, the person goes, brilliant, I'm up for that. But if they've got a weak LMX, they go, they're just trying to butter me up, it's a load of nonsense. The same thing happens with feedback. When feedback is given with a strong LMX, the individual embraces it, thinks it's a rich source of learning, and goes on and acts on that feedback. But where the LMX is weak, this relationship between manager and the person being managed, they just ignore it and actually have less respect for the manager as a result. So if we've got this LMX piece right, this relationship between the boss and the person being managed, and the good managers realize that that's a relationship that's built and nourished in 100 interactions every day. I mean, a bit like thinking about our partner and saying all that matters is the anniversary. It's just like we're saying all that matters is the annual performance review. The relationships we have at home are ones that nurture every phone call, every email, the things we do, the pattern of our behavior defines the strength of our relationships at home. And in much the same way at work too. So there's a key part of this, which is the relationship between the manager and the person being managed and how to make that strong. And this has a magnifier or a reducer on everything else that we cover. Obviously, relationships are not just about one-to-one, they're also about one-to-team. And there's a big here about building pride. And those managers that are able to set goals, set milestones, and celebrate them, and the mini milestones on the way, and feel a sense of collection. And if you've ever had a great teacher or a great manager, you've probably noticed how they build a sense of pride amongst the group, that we're all in this together. There may be a common enemy outside, maybe a department to beat or a competitor or something like that, but we're all in this together. And actually, we can only achieve the goal if we all contribute. We each have a role to play, but without one of us, the whole thing doesn't happen so well. And Michael West will talk a bit more about this, the factors that make up a high-performing team. And the third bit of relate is about relationships with the rest of the organization, providing the air cover, getting people off our backs, and using my networks in order to bring people together. The really interesting research on people who move organizations, they look at analyst teams in investment banks, and they found those analyst teams, the whole team was moved from, say, JP Morgan to, say, Goldman Sachs. They underperformed in the new organization versus how they had in the previous one. Now you think because it was the whole team and it was the same set of clients and the same work, they perform at least as well, potentially better. They've been paid a lot more to move there. But actually the cultural environment, the networks they had, the social support is so significant that it actually led to a fall off in their performance. So again, there's some really important stuff about relate. And this we could talk about forever, and won't today, but this is the one that matters. And if nothing else gets addressed in the managers, this is the one that most counts. But this is also the one that's most about the psychology of behaviors, boundaries, redefining, getting hooked in transactional analysis games, what happens when people, the no-but game and the I can do better than this game, and so on and so forth. So this is where that manager needs those skills to redefine those relationships when they get tricky. The next piece is about energize. A lot of research was done by Gallup on the impact of leadership programs, and they found that those that were most effective were the ones that got leaders to give hope to their people, to raise energy, and instead of, when you come back from the weekend and someone says, how was your weekend? What do people tend to say? It's okay, it's fine, it's all right, nice. And those that actually give rather more substance to their answers. It was terrible, I went to this film, it was rubbish, or it was fantastic, I went to the beach, we had such fun, or whatever it was, but give more color, give more energy, give more in exuding their energy, and then infect those around them. And therefore, this ability to energize others, simply that sense of spirit and momentum is incredibly important. The third one is direct. This sometimes gets lost, or sometimes gets overplayed. but it's about giving the context and being, to a degree, having a sense of authority about where we're going, what needs to be done, and when. There are times for consultation and for collaboration, and there are times for decisions. And the manager is the manager, not the best friend, not the ally, not the forever listener, the mum or dad, the counselor. They are the manager, and the manager needs to set direction, give it, and guide people along those paths. The fourth one is Thrive. We hosted a dinner earlier this week for a whole range of CEOs, many from your organizations, and thank you for those who helped bring them along. And Paul Walsh, who's the CEO of Diageo, who in the last 10 years, the stock market has gone down 10%, and the Diageo stock price has doubled, which is quite a result, which is no surprise why he's one of the longest serving CEOs in the FTSE 100. He's been there for over 10 years, which is, I think, like Martin Sorrell and one other have been any longer. So he's really been there for a long time. He's delivered the results. He knows what works. And he's invested enormously in leadership. He says he's invested £20 million in cash in a leadership program just to raise the standard of leadership across his organization because he sees it as so important. And one of the things he kept coming back to was leaders looking after themselves. Because actually, if they don't look after themselves, then that's going to affect everyone else around them. So a leader who thrives not only becomes resilient, not only finds ways of renewing their own resources, but looks at how they can grow. What are their strengths and how can they guide the work so they're playing to their strengths, and so they're doing different work in a year's time from what they're doing today, rather than carrying on and trying to maintain and control and be swamped and exhausted and tired and worn down by it all. So this ability to thrive, to look after myself, is incredibly important. The next one is coach. Again, we've all heard lots about coaching in our lives. We've come up with a model called commercial coaching, which we'll talk a bit more about in O2 case study, which is about a much more future-focused approach to coaching and a much more commercial model where we're being not just asking questions, but at times being quite directive as well. Moving on, innovate, the ability to think things differently. Again, a big theme that came out in this debate, and we had the CEO of TalkTalk and O2 and the MD of Accenture and leading folk from Kraft and so forth, what we're talking about is how the world is moving so much faster that actually what you need is managers who can think through the answer themselves and make good judgment calls, who can find out how different way of looking at the problem. So they see what everyone else sees, but think what no one else has thought. And that ability to change that, to think differently, to come up with fresh ideas, is at the heart of being an effective manager, which is hence those questions about have they changed the way that things work, rather than just doing the job, changing the way it's done to make it more effective. And the final one is about execute. I just come back from a fascinating fact-finding mission in India, and I was in Mumbai and Hyderabad, and I met a series of CEOs from some of the biggest and most successful companies there, and I also went rag picking with the people in the slums and just saw India from a whole range of different angles, a whole range of different management styles, and what does it take to manage rag picking. They take the garbage out and they get it, it's their version of recycling, and they get paid 2 rupees a bag of recycled rubbish in 42-degree heat. And yet at the same time, I met a wonderful guy called Louis Miranda, who runs IDFC Capital. He's run several banks. He's described by the Wall Street Journal as having built more power stations than the Indian government. He's done an amazing job there of transforming how the energy sector works across India, and built great businesses as a result. And I asked him what was the one skill he most wanted to see increased in his managers, and he said it's the ability to execute, the ability to complete and make stuff happen. And I have to say, when Paul Walsh was talking, he also talked about the ability to execute. He said, I have lots of managers who are too busy innovating and talking and coming up with complex models and ways of doing things, are not enough who get on and make it happen. So this ability to complete, to get stuff, to get the results, is a vital 7th talent of the manager. So we thought that was a useful way of thinking about managers, not the 100 competencies, but the 7, and the 7 that consistently show a greater delta in management performance. I'm going to just share with you briefly a research with 38 organizations, again listed in one of the footnotes in the paper, about where was the biggest difference. And actually direct and execute were seen as the smaller gaps, and relate was the biggest one. So this most important of these management characteristics is seen by these 38 organizations, by HR people in these 38 organizations, as the biggest gap, the one that most needs addressing. So what can we do about it? I think there's a few thoughts on the organizational side, then I'm going to talk a little bit about management development, because I've been slightly rude about it, and I want to explain how I think we can solve this problem. The first thing is, organizationally, we can turn up the noise around promoting people who are good at this. And when we do make a noise about that's why they were promoted, And we can, at the bottom point here, we can start to appraise managers against a whole range of metrics, like retention or absenteeism, as well as employee survey results and other things around human performance. And in particular, we can focus more on these second and third line managers, and how do they manage the people management bit of their direct reports rather than the task management bit or the output management bit. But I also want to talk a bit about development. And I think this is where we can all collectively do something very radical that would both save us money and greatly increase the impact and our ability to grow managers quickly. And there are some principles here. The first is that we learn more when we learn little and often. Psychologists call this distributed learning. And we think about how you learn to drive a car, how you learn to play the piano or anything like that. It's a bit at a time. Also, we try something, we give it a go, and then we come back and reflect. How did it go? Did it work? Did it not? What could I learn differently? And what about others like me who've been through something similar? How can I learn from them? We therefore learn with our peers, and we need to pitch a bit higher. We talk at Mind Gym about pitching to the top quartile of any group, and everyone else has to stretch to kind of get there. Whereas there's sometimes an orthodoxy in the learning world that we have to go at the pace of the slowest learner. And that means a lot of people feel it's a bit basic for them, a bit dull. People come back and say, I could have done that in 2 hours, took a whole day. And that's because we're pitching things a little low. So we need to raise our altitude on this. And I want to share with you an example of a program we've run, which is an altruistic program run by the Mind Gym called Parent Gym. And one of the challenges that that exists in society is the fact that parents, the quality of parenting has a greater impact on school grades and life chances and emotional security than anything else. It's better than school buildings or head teachers or curriculum or any of that sort of stuff. It's the quality of parenting. But very little is done to improve parenting, especially in the socially deprived, harder to reach groups of our society. So we set up a 9-week program run in some of the poorest parts of London and Belfast on parenting. And each week, people have a magazine. The thing on the right is a copy of the magazine. It looks a bit like OK Magazine. Different themes, love, health, friends and family. And you go through the magazine. It's like a workout for those who've been to a Mind Gym workout. It's very participative. You're filling in stuff. You're talking to each other. You're doing exercises. And at the end, you agree on a mission, which you and I might call homework, but they're called missions, on something I'm going to try and do between now and next week. It might be have a treasure hunt. It might be try the naughty step. It might be make a pizza together. It might be do a scrapbook. It might be spend one-to-one time with one of my children. Any of these things. I'm going to try it out and see what happens. Next week, I come back and I score on myself on a scale of 1 to 10 about how much effort I put in to that particular mission. And if I scored 7 or higher, I tell the story about what happened. It may have been a disaster. We tried the treasure hunt. I had the clues around the park. It rained. Everyone cried. It was a disaster. Went home. But someone else may say, well, I tried the treasure hunt, it also rained, but then I knocked on some neighbours' doors and said, could I use their flats as sources for the treasure hunt as well? And they said, yeah, okay, that sounds like fun, but can my child take part too? And we had this big, and the stories start to get shared. And this is what we mean by the peer learning, that we learn far more from each other often than we do from the experts. But the real lesson for today that we've learned from this is the power of distributed learning. So the model that we've approached, and we've developed our Mind Gym Masterclass, which is an open program, the only open program we run, on management skills. And it's designed like this. We also do versions of this in a range of organizations. And I want to tell you why it's designed like this and why this is a model that can help you, whatever you're doing, make it more effective. We start off with a diagnostic, some baseline measure, some sense of where along those 7 traits do I score most strongly, which are the strengths to build from, and which of those I might want to develop. We then run some session. Our story, we basically run 90-minute workouts, but this could be a half day or whatever, on one of the topics. We think it's good to start with relate, because it's such an important one and it magnifies everything else, but it could be any topic that you like. Then at the end of that, we agree a mission, or an action challenge, or a task, or a bit of homework, something we're going to go and try and do back in the office or the factory or the sewage plant where I was yesterday. And then when I come back a week later or 2 weeks later, or maybe it's a month later, I do a thing called a booster. And in the booster, we discuss what happened, how well it worked. It only takes 15, 20 minutes, maybe half an hour, what I can learn from that and what I could do differently. Then, when we come back from the booster, we go to the next subject, in this case, Thrive. We learn something, we take an action challenge, and we come back a week or 2 later and do that. And so we continue learning on a regular basis, learning something, trying it out, and coming back and reflecting. So our management development isn't a one-off event in some fancy hotel in glorious place, or even with lovely views all over London, but it's something that takes place at work. It's something that takes place in 2-hour bursts, once a week, once a fortnight, once a month. And I'm always learning, and I'm always trying, and I'm always coming with peers to review. And then the second and third line managers are at the top getting involved in doing that. And that's the basic model for what O2 did. So if you're interested in that, you can hear a lot more about how that worked at the case study this afternoon.